Welcome to Welding and Fabrication. Today we're going to be doing some basic marking out, and I'm going to go through some basic hand tools that you would use for doing some simple marking out exercises. So from the right there we've got an engineer square, got a set square, small tape measure, 3 metres. We've got a rule which is 30 centimetres or 300 millimetres. We've got a back mark gauge, we have a scribe, centre punch, piece of French chalk, we have a permanent marker pen or a Sharpie, and a small ball peen hammer. Basic marking out in terms of, all I want to go through is just some simple marking hole centres and the importance of using datum edges to reduce the amount of cumulative error that you're going to create within your piece of material. So the first thing you want to do is just take your engineer square, your set square, and just double check. You'll see there across the corner of the piece of material that is at 90 degrees. That way we know that this edge across this face of the material and this edge up the side here are at 90, so we can use both these as our datum edges, and we can project our measurements from this left hand corner across this face of the material. So all I'm going to do today is I'm going to mark out just dot punch some material, mark it out very simply, and have some hole centres that we're going to work from. So what I'm going to do is, from the edge of the face of the material down the bottom here, I'm going to simply come in and I'm going to mark it out, and we're going to have 30, 30, 40, and then 50. And those markings, they're going to be centre punched or ready to be drilled through at whatever size hole we decide they're going to go in at. Up from the edge of the piece of material, so from the bottom datum edge, our hole is going to go in 50mm in a line, 50mm in from the bottom edge. So we have different options to decide how we're actually going to mark those holes out. So a couple of the easiest ways, and actually some of the most accurate ways, is to either use a back mark gauge in conjunction with a rule, and all you would do is take the point and measure from the face, like so, to the point. And if we know that we've got to have 50mm, just bring that out slightly. Just jig it along, there we go, just a tiny little bit more. So we're at 50mm to the centre of that point. Now what we can do is we can just tighten that off, just double check, make sure that it is sitting at 50mm, which it is. And then from the edge of the face of the material, put this onto the face there, hold it nice and square, and keeping it nice and straight, mark your line across the face of the material. Okay. Now if you want to double check, you can bring your rule in against the edge of the material, and you can see there that from our line we've marked down to the edge of the material there, it's 50mm. Okay, so that's a nice simple way, and it's 50mm at this end of the line or at this end of the line. So we've got a consistent line that we've measured off of this datum edge. What we can do from that point there is we can do one or two things. The easiest way to mark your centres for your holes is either to use an engineer square or a set square. In this instance, I'm going to use a set square. Bring it up against the face of that piece of material, and then using your other datum edge, we can see our line, or we can just about see the line there. So we know our first hole is going to be 30mm. So if we measure off the face of that 30mm, like so, and then we take our scribe and we scribe through, then we end up with this intersection between the two lines. It's a little bit tricky to see the other line there. We end up with this intersection between the two lines, and basically at that point in time there, we can take our centre punch, and what you want to do is bring it over at an angle first, bring it up against the edge of the hole, or the edge of the marking, should I say, the cross marking. Bring it up so you can see it so that both ways are meeting, and then bring it into the upright position. Light tap, not too hard, and then double check just to make sure it's in the correct position. You can see there that on the crosshairs it's in the centres there. Now, when you mark the second hole out, and we said we're going to mark the first one at 30 and the second one at 30 as well, the important thing to do is not to measure 30 from that hole there, because we end up with what's called a cumulative error. And that means that if this rule is ever so slightly out, or if, for instance, our measurements, it could be we measure it at 31 rather than 30, what happens is that we end up with a cumulative error. So we add more and more measurements on as we go along. So the important thing to do is whether you're using, I say I can use an engineer square or a set square. We know that that first hole, the first mark, should I say, we put in, the first centre mark was 30, and we know that the next one is going to be 30 as well, so we bring the rule across from that datum edge again, up to 60 millimetres like so, and mark our line in, like so. So we know that there's 30 to the first mark, and now to the second mark is 60. So our next one is going to be an addition to that, it's going to be an additional 40. So what we're going to do is we're going to go 30, 60, and then we'll add another 40, so it's going to give us 100. So we'll go from this edge again, at 100 millimetres, so we can see from the edge of the piece of material, on that datum edge, we've marked it at 100. And again, bring our line through. And those ones, like I said, those ones that we've just marked in, we can bring across like so. And just make sure those marks are nice and accurate. You don't want to hit it too hard because you end up with too big a hole, or it distorts it slightly, so the accuracy, that hole in terms of where your centre punch is, starts to drift ever so slightly as well. So you don't want to hit it too hard when you're dot punching it there. So our next mark is 50. Now another option you can do is to take a set square, and rather than just using your rule against an engineer square like so, what you can do is take your set square, and off the face of the piece of material, you can see from this end here, it measures all the way up to 300. And all we're going to do is, we know it needs to be set at 150, so obviously 30, 30, 40 and 50 gives you 150. So we're going to bring this until the edge of this face meets 150 like so, just tighten that off. And then what that enables us to do is to put it onto the face, again that datum edge there on the material, datum edge on the material there. And then on the end of the piece of material, on the end of the scribe down this section here, and our mark is on the end, okay? And what this enables us to do, we can double check it, and if you want to double check our marks all the way along, we can check like so. So we say 30, 60, 100, and then 150. Let's just dot punch that 150. It's important to dot punch them as you're going along, one, so you don't lose track of where you are, but also it enables you to give you a reference point for your next measurement that you're going to make. Using the tape measure, if you've only got a tape measure to use, the one thing I would say is try not to use the end of the tape, because at the end of the day there's a little bit of play in that, and it could be that if it's been dropped, that can get bent over slightly. So if I'm ever using a tape measure and I want to try and use it, I mean, a tape measure isn't necessarily the most accurate tool in the world in terms of for marking out, but actually, if you use it correctly, you can still get a reasonably accurate measurement. So what we're going to do is, rather than going from the end of the tape like so and hooking it on the material, we're going to go from the 100 mark, and therefore by going from the 100, it's just going to be a little bit more accurate. We can control where that 100 mark is going to be placed, and we can see there, it's reading 130, 160, 200 and then 250. So actually our markings are all in the correct position. Okay? Things like a Sharpie or French chalk, depending on the type of material you're going to be using, sometimes from a visual point of view, you can see that if we set our set square at 50, it could be that you're really struggling to see the scribe marks on a piece of material. If you've got a nice dry surface on the material, what you can do is then put it on the face of that datum edge on the material, like so. Take your piece of chalk and run it through, like so. Now, depending on how hard you place it, and you can see as I'm running along there, depending on how hard I place that piece of chalk, or press down, is to how the difference in the thickness of that line as well. So if you want quite a fine line, which the thinner the line, the more accurate your measurement is going to be, it enables you to just apply a little bit of pressure rather than a lot. Things like Sharpies, they're okay for marking up, but you can see straight away that the size of the thickness of the line is quite thick. So in terms of marking out the accuracy, you're always going to be, in terms of the cumulative error, if you've got lots of markings you need to make, then potentially there's going to be an increase, or there's going to be some form of cumulative error using something like a Sharpie. If you use a fine line Sharpie pen, much more accurate, and if you're marking out something like stainless steel, much better, because you're not going to be scratching the surface of the material, so you don't want to be using the scribe, because when we're talking about stainless steel, it could be the aesthetics, and we're not going to want to damage that surface finish on the piece of material. Okay, thank you.